Uber drivers, what crazy secrets have you overheard?
Number 1. Two girls talking about how they have done the same guy. Both agreed his thing was too big and he was hurting them by lasting too long. Both concluded he was gay. Number 2. Two middle-aged couples trying to agree to a foursome.
I picked up this young, overly affectionate couple that spent the entire trip making out in my backseat and telling each other that they loved each other. Cute. So I drop off the couple and head on my way to pick up my next ride. I hear a cell phone ring in my backseat and realize it's from my previous ride, and pick up the phone to let them know I have it and it'll come back to drop it off. Turns out it was the guy's wife phoning to check in on him while he was on a business trip, which he was thoroughly enjoying with his mistress. When I was going to drop off the phone, I had planned to say, in front of him and his mistress, "Your wife sounds like a lovely person." I approached him with the phone and he handed me a $100 bill. I was so shocked that my plan failed completely.
Uber passenger here. I had a driver tell me he was changing his name to Nilram because it was Merlin spelled backwards and he was a wizard.
Once I had an extremely drunk middle-aged couple fight for an entire 30-minute ride. They attempted to bring me into their fight many times. I just pretended like I was deaf and didn't answer when they tried to rope me into it.
Once I had two girls and a guy declare their love for each other as friends. They were saying they should hang out more often when they got in the car, and by the time I dropped them off they hated each other and never wanted to speak again. My tongue was bleeding by the end of the ride from trying not to laugh my ass off. I cracked a few smiles. I wonder if they ever noticed. They were fighting over the new football coach at the local uni.
My friend Ubers in my hometown picked up some really nice girls out on first Friday. They're talking about their plans for next autumn. Guy thinks he recognizes one of them. Turns out to be my younger sister and he tells me all about it. And that's how I found out my little sister was moving to Spain.
I drove Uber for one night. It was pretty tame until I picked up two guys who wanted to go to a club about 40 miles away. As they requested an Uber Select fare, I was happy to drive that far. $80,100. It took them 15 minutes to get ready and into the car and they seemed cool, so I wasn't worried. As soon as we got on the freeway, the guy in the passenger seat started asking about Uber driving and things got dark. After a few minutes he started saying shit like, what would you do if someone just grabbed the steering wheel and ran the car into the median, and have you ever thought about what would happen if someone in the back seat tried to strangle you while you were driving? I got a little freaked out and tried to lighten the mood by asking what they were celebrating, etc., but the one guy just kept at it. I was happy to get to the club and getting the hell out of the car. Bonus was the bouncer at the club gave me $40 for dropping them off there. I never drove Uber again. F that.
Former Uber driver here. Picked a girl up, a sweet girl from a bar on a Wednesday night, absolutely hammered, about 10 p.m. She got into my car, apologized for being so drunk and politely asked if we could just drive around a little while, with the windows down. I was prepping for a cleaning fee, trying to drive and pull a vomit bag out of a glove box. But no, she just did that airplane thing with one hand out the backseat window. That's when she told me that she had cancer. It was in her brain and it was too far gone to consider chemo. I remember my heart just pounding. She told me she was okay with it. Tonight she was celebrating with her work friends who threw her a going-away party. She told them she was taking a position abroad.
I just didn't tell them that abroad was heaven.
I turned off my app and cried my ass all the way home.
Picked up a girl mid-Saturday. She was a bit upset and a little teary and opened up to me. Turned out a business she had started was failing and she was in debt and had turned to exotic dancing on the side to cover the bills. She said the pay was good, but she kept getting really sick from all the booze she felt obliged to drink. Part of her job was making guys spend money at the bar. She hated it and felt trapped and kept asking me what I would do in her situation. I'm a guy, so kind of hard for me to answer. Tried to give her the best advice I could think of, like getting the tax office to withhold tax for a while, but couldn't help really. Only thing I could do was end the trip early. Dancer girl apparently didn't know the usual trick for exotic dancers. Usually if they don't want to actually drink, they talk to the bartender before they open up and the bartender will give them non-alcoholic drinks for the night. Otherwise most dancers would have a liver anymore. I sadly was taught this after my trip with her.
Took this 19-year-old guy and what I assumed was his girlfriend back to her house on Pride weekend in San Francisco. They made out the whole ride. When I dropped them off, only she got out. He said, "Take me to Castro and 18th. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I only make out with girls when I am rolling." Never dull moment in San Francisco.
I picked up a guy from a gay bar and he was noticeably coming on to me. He then confessed that he was one of the founders of a very popular gaming company and offered me $2,000 to come up to his room. He also refused to leave my car unless I kissed his hand. Fun times.
Never overheard a juicy secret, but I have a fun story. One time I had a group of 3 guys, probably around my age, mid-20s. They seemed nervous, avoided eye contact, and were pretty much silent from the moment they hopped in. I tried confirming the destination, asked how their night was going, etc., but only got muffled mumbling in return. As always, I worked the situation out in my head in a calm, rational manner. Something like, are these guys trying to rob me? Steal my car? Do they have knowledge of the impending apocalypse? But as my paranoia routine winded down, I slowly started to realize what was going on. Between the beads of sweat, occasional jaw clenching, and finally giggle outbursts, these kids were tripping effing balls. Once it hit me, I called them out immediately and told them I was cool. They looked so relieved. I started blasting music, some Humphreys McGee I do believe, and they just started geeking out by that point. Fun ride. At the end of the ride, the guy that sat up front tossed me a bag of mushrooms. Good times.
It wasn't so much weird as it was random. My first night driving for Uber, I picked up a dude at 2:30 in the morning that was finishing up a pub crawl. The dude was dressed in a purple dinosaur onesie and was hammered. He got in and started telling me his entire life story and how he came out to his parents and moved across the country the next day.
I am not an Uber driver, but I have one that was told to me. This driver told me that he picked up his last fare for the day and it did not have a final destination. The dude gets in the car, clearly on something and out of his mind, yelling on the phone. The guy says drive to Vegas, here, and the guy tosses $500 at him. That is on top of the Uber fare, which apparently was surge pricing. So the guy drives him to Vegas, from Los Angeles, and takes about 4 hours. The whole time the guy is talking and yelling on the phone to his mom. They get to Vegas and he drops the dude off at some mansion where his mom is outside waiting to yell at him. Apparently the guy forgot about giving him the cash because he tossed another few $100 at him, got out of the car and split.
Picked up a girl who had to go to work across town. Her boyfriend and her were arguing in the parking lot as I was approaching. The girl gets in my car and she's worried she's not going to get to work on time and tells me she would be fired if she was late. We get about a block away from where I picked her up, and my phone rings. I answered and the person on the other line was her boyfriend. He wanted to apologize about his girlfriend and that I should listen to her because she was a crazy b*tch. She heard all of it and didn't say a thing. Very awkward. When we finally got to her work, she asks me to stay in the parking lot as she goes in and quits her job. She gets back a few minutes later and on the way home tells me that her boyfriend once broke her arm in an argument and that he was going to be very mad at her and she was worried about going back home but to take her there anyway. Ended up dropping her off and calling non-emergency, but I have no clue if anything ever happened with it.
Not so much a dark secret, as much as a potentially dark situation. Driving around waiting for pings, get one at a popular bar. Pull up and a young woman flags me down, gives me her name, asks for mine. I am her ride. Easy enough. There's a guy with her, they're both quite drunk. She says goodnight to him and gets in the rear passenger side door. Homeboy isn't having it, decides he's coming with. Starts trying to convince her, despite her saying she has work early, wants to get to sleep, but he's not taking no for an answer. It's getting a bit weird as he's getting more and more pushy, aggressive about it, to the point that she's clearly uncomfortable. I step out of the car, and say over the top of the car, hey man, if she says you're not getting at the car, you're not getting in the car. He looks over at me with hate in his eyes. I am a bit tense, not knowing this kid's deal. He slams the door, walks away, talking shit as he goes. Really? Talking shit as you walk away? What a hard ass. Get back in the car. Girl seems a little more sober after the experience, and is shaken up over it. Take her back home. Make sure she gets in safe. Not as scary or as weird as it could have been, but the dude gave off a bad vibe and I am glad he took the hint and effed off.
Two dudes discussing how much fun they had at one of theirs bachelor party. The fun consisted of the most blow I've ever done and I can't believe I did a lot lizard right before I got married.
One time I was driving a dude for a bit of a long trip. Was gonna take around 25-30 minutes. He wasn't hammered, but definitely a bit drunk. It was late and he must have been feeling a bit down, so he confided in me and asked me for some advice. He told me he's madly in love with his fiance's best friend and he couldn't back out now. Had been with this girl 4 years, and engaged for 1, ready to be married in a few months. It was pretty sad to hear, because it wasn't just your average story. It was filled with a lot of subtle emotional and mental anguish. The guy went through about 5 years of ups and downs with his girl, and found an innocent friend and comfort in the best friend. After a few years, he developed feelings and it was just downhill from there. Felt bad for the guy because he seemed like he was truly in love with his fiancée too, although he had strong feelings for this friend. He knew that going through with the marriage meant a lifetime of being around the friend and suppressing feelings, but also breaking it off meant that he lost the girl of his dreams. Seemed like a genuinely nice guy, and I hope he's doing okay.
I once drove some well-dressed Russians in between bars on the west side of Chicago. I used to work for a Russian-owned cab company and I understand a little Russian, and I heard two of them talking back and forth about something one of them was very anxious about. The phrases that jumped out at me were "this is death," "this is serious," "blood is on me," "I am not a bad man." The guy was mainly just telling him to relax a lot, and telling him there are no fools here, or something those lines. Upon dropping them off, like an idiot, I temporarily blanked that I had just heard parts of a seemingly harrowing conversation, and I said Dobroj nochi el, which is pronounced Dobroy nochi and means good night. Only one of them heard me, the older guy telling his colleague to relax, and he just stared at me. Then he came around to my window while reaching into his coat pocket, which scared me shitless. He then pulled out a $100 and said, in English, "My friend, do we understand?" I just shook my head in the affirmative, and drove off. I didn't take any rides for the rest of the night.
Picked up a drunk guy on St. Patrick's Day. He was talking about his boyfriend, and asked me if he should break up with him. He then proceeded to tell me about the two dudes he was going to cheat on his boyfriend with that night. Just a weird set of conversations.
One of the things that I didn't really expect from this job is that I feel like a bartender at times. People will just vent to us. Maybe it has to do with the fact that we're an anonymous ear and people feel comfortable telling things to a third party.
Not quite the question, but I feel very sorry for the Uber driver who had to drive my drunk ass home while my ex railed into me for changing the karaoke song he was going to sing. I was crying and he was screaming while subtle jazz played through the speakers.
I drove Bill Gates on the Lyft platform. He has an iPhone.
My husband had a couple that broke up in the backseat of his car while driving for Uber. The woman made fun of her boyfriend's ex, and was talking about how she had bad teeth. The boyfriend said her teeth were fine and that she was being really judgy. She then asked him if he was still in love with his ex. He thought for a moment, said yes, and she started crying. There was some kind of confusion about where to get dropped off since she just wanted to go home and he wanted to go somewhere the opposite direction. Super awkward for my husband.